Hi, my name is Bilal and I'll be doing the second half of chapter 22. A well-known performer, her name was Jennifer Higdon. She didn't really know too much about classical music until she started college, but from there she fell in love with it. In 2010, she was awarded a prize for her violin composed for Hilary Hahn, who was her former student from Curtis Institution in Philadelphia. Another famous composer, Osvaldo, was born in Argentina. He was an Argentinian American composer. He was born in a Eastern European Jewish family. He lived in Israel for a few years, and in 1986 he came to the United States. And he studied composition at University of Pennsylvania. And for the past 2 decades, he's been living in Massachusetts, and he teaches composition at a College of the Holy Cross in Westchester. Another Spanish language work based on the New Testament named John Adams. El Nino is a worthy addition to the string political engaged works that Adams began in the 1980s. Also, like Adams, Steve Reich occasionally touched on political themes in his music, called Come Out in 1966. This was mostly discussed in a previous chapter, I believe 18. Classical composition changed a little bit in the 90s. European music of the 1700s and 1800s had lost most of its position, of its privileged position. If Americans have a common musical culture, it comes from radio, television, or any other form of mass media that plays a small role in the lives of younger generations, as well as older generations. Because so much music is created digitally nowadays, musical notation is fading in importance. Few scores are published today, but recorded music is easy to distribute, therefore new music is more likely than ever before to be judged on how it sounds now. Thanks to digital samples, the most elemental musical unit, which used to be the individual note, may now be a complex sound of quotations. Because exposure to popular music is almost universal, composers who hope to reach a live audience rarely write without referring to pop's musical conventions. Classical performance also changed in the 1990s. A number of performers have broken away from the traditional, quote-unquote traditional classical recital in search for a more immediate connection with its listeners. Also, classical musicians are more likely now than ever to speak to audiences from the stage. A leading example is a Chinese American cellist, Yo-Yo Ma, perhaps one of the most well-known classical instrumentalists in the world today. Ma is not only a master of the standard cello, but also a musical omnivore, collaborating with a variety of musical traditions and other musicians. In 1998, Ma had founded an ongoing Silk Road project, and that promoted collaborations among musicians from regions historically joined by the trade routes, known as the Silk Road of Europe, North Africa, the Middle East, South Asia, China, and Southeast Asia. In 2007, the New York Philharmonic Orchestra appointed the next music director, and his name was Alan Gilbert. His debut, which was in September 2009, he was 42 years old and the second youngest to hold that post in the history of orchestra. Both of his parents were NYPO violinists, and his mother, Yoko Takebe, continued playing in the orchestra after her son's appointment. Gilbert was an experimentalist, and he experimented with the formats of orchestra concerts. He distributed the Grey Album, which was on February 24th, 2004, a date which was called a Grey Tuesday, one of the first acts of civil disobedience to protest copyright protection. Grey Tuesday sparked an interest to other musicians. And the next big venture was hip hop. At first it was more of a mashup than hip hop. Mashup are tracks from two or more songs that are combined to create a new song. The original idea of mashup goes back to the 1950s, but it wasn't really that big until the 90s. Then came 1992, and in 1992, hip-hop artists started to take many different paths towards creation of hip-hop beat. First, the wealthiest hip-hop artists simply pay high fees for different samples of music. Second, some artists chose samples that were less expensive to clear, and third, some producers prefer to use studio musicians to recreate songs that were created way back when. Then came 1998, and in 1998 there was an explosion, so to speak. The DCMA, which is Digital Millennium Copyright Act, gives copyright holders veto power over all use of their work, even those that constitute fair use. It authorizes the use of digital rights management, which is DRM, the tools to restrict how consumers use electronic media, such as DVD or MP3. The DCMA was in part a response to the new form of listening to music, which was called MP3. Music fans began to share recorded music online, and for free, mind you, and by the end of the decade, 17 million MP3s were being downloaded onto personal computers every single day. And Sean Fanning, an 18-year-old student in Northeastern University, which is located in Boston, developed a utility that made it even easier for users to locate MP3 songs and download them directly onto their computer. It was called P2P, which is peer-to-peer. You might also know this from torrenting, if you've ever done that before. And when his utility went online in 1999, it quickly developed a devoted following in a short period of time. It had about 25 million users and indexed over 80 million songs. And in the early 2000s, something new became popular: reggaeton. It's a blend of hip-hop with Latin American and Caribbean influences, including the Jamaican dance that inspired hip-hop in the first place. Now, I'm not going to go into too much detail from reggaeton because I really don't like it. And then another big thing came about, which is fair use. I don't know if you've ever heard of it, but if you have, great. If you haven't, fair use is the concept that no formal permission is needed when a work or art or literature is copied for purposes of criticism, parody, scholarships, and other limited use, such as video game footage. And when fair use blew up, plagiarism also blew up. And everyone associated plagiarism with fair use, which eventually caused an outbreak, and people started getting sued and stuff. Like rock and country that other students have discussed in previous chapters, hip hop also had sub branches, so to speak, and it was called alternative hip hop. The term arose as a way to distinguish artists that fit neither the gangsta rap nor the mainstream categories of hip hop. Now, time for my two questions. Question number one: when fair use blew up, what also blew up? What is an alternative to hip hop?